As the 50s drew to a close, WFMY TV had been broadcasting from its new Phillips Avenue studios in Greensboro for almost 5 years. But specialization for the people who worked in local TV was still a few years away.
In the early days, there was a news director, but it was just an anointed position. It was a staff announcer who did the 6 o'clock news.
But that situation would change dramatically in the 60s. While WFMY TV was celebrating its 10th anniversary, scandal and scathing criticism of the industry were capturing the national headlines. First, there was the craze over quiz shows. Then the ethical crisis that accompanied the revelation that answers had been rigged on some of the most popular programs. Then came the charge by FCC Commissioner Newton Meno that TV programming amounted to a vast wasteland of violence, repetitive formulas, irritating commercials, and sheer boredom.
Channel 2 reacted to that by doing a series of locally produced documentaries. We became, I believe we did one a month after we got geared up to do those. This became a creative outlet for the staff. The staff members looked upon this as an opportunity to go beyond the daily routine, and they accepted these things with relish and said, "Hey, pretty soon we had a whole backlog of titles and subjects that we could do submitted by the staff."
The first WFMY TV documentary examined the dropout problem in North Carolina. The Ones Who Quit was written and produced by WFMY TV's Director of Research, Catherine Sloan. The third phenomenon, and by far the most important to spur the development of local TV news, happened in Greensboro on February 1st, 1960. Late that afternoon, a caller informed the newsroom that 4 students from the North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College were sitting in at the downtown Woolworth store's all-white lunch counter, waiting to be served.
I still feel a little bit of a chill. I heard someone say, "We've just received a phone call that there are 4 of young men from A&T sitting in at Woolworth's. And somebody said it's too late to get film, we'll try to cover it tomorrow." And I had the distinct feeling at that time, and it proved to be true, that was a moment the universe changed.
Within weeks, the sit-in phase of the civil rights movement spread to 64 cities in 9 states.
To have thousands of people in the street was not an unusual thing in the days that followed the sit-ins. Because at that point you were having civil rights leaders from all over the country come here and lead demonstrators like Farmer. And when they brought in their expertise, they knew that television could help. Now, the original sit-in folk did not call a television station and say, "Hey, come take pictures of us, we're going to do this." But once the organizations began to arrive, they knew that the best way to get people's attention was to have the big demonstration and have it on television. And so an attorney who was hired by those people who were maintaining the philosophy that we serve only those we wish to serve was employed to represent them. And he said, he was Armistead Sapp, and he told me once that he told them that he would be their red-necked attorney, and he would appear on national television espousing their philosophy. He said, however, the decision is not going to come in a court of law, and this decision is not going to come in a civil suit. The decision will come one day when you sense what the people sitting at home in their living rooms have decided. And he said, indeed, it happened that way. That one day his clients came to him and said, "We think the people at home are tired of seeing this, and let's open our doors." And so therefore we were in an integrated public situation before the Civil Rights Act.
The next major demonstrations occurred in Greensboro across an 18-day period from May 11th to June 7th, 1963. Time and again, marchers, sometimes numbering in the thousands, spread into Greensboro's downtown business district. At one point, there were more than 1,400 young blacks in jail. During this period, student activists at A&T State University encouraged Jesse Jackson to accept a leadership role.
First time that I saw Jesse Jackson, he was a student at A&T, and he and Boyd Morris, who was the manager of a cafeteria, were standing in the doorway screaming at each other while an NBC cameraman and his sound man screamed at each other trying to cover it, with a mob of people outside. See, he was not one of the originals, but he very, very much came to the forefront in a very, very quick way.
On the campuses and out in the streets, News 2 reporters and cameramen found themselves challenged by the tension of the 60s.
The thing that gets me, I think, is that we kept hearing things around our ear, zee, zee. So that night after we finally got through and went home, I told my wife, I said, well, there were bees in the alley there. And she said, fool, there were not any bees out at that time of night. We were being shot at.
As more and more protesters went out into the streets, professional news gathering equipment was needed to record the stories. Former chief photographer Bill Gordon remembers what it was like to finally film sound to go along with the action.
Well, about 56, 57, we got a sound camera, Archon sound camera, and some of them were big and bulky, and we could shoot interviews, sound on film, which we didn't do in the early days where we had no sound, we just had narration over it.
Those first sound cameras were modified so News 2's cameramen could hoist them onto their shoulders and take them right out into the streets.
Sometimes at those days we were shooting 60, 70,000 feet of film a month, and it could get right expensive to shoot that much.
In the early years, local television news was broadcast on a Monday through Friday schedule. That changed dramatically in the 60s at WFMY TV. When Landmark Communications of Norfolk purchased the station from the Greensboro News Company, an increased budget created a large professional news department. News 2 expanded across the weekend, and the first black reporter, Freddie Davis, came to work.
The first story that Freddie covered was a United Way agency meeting, perhaps Boy Scouts, but a United Way agency meeting at Greensboro Country Club. When Freddie arrived and they saw that he was black, they asked him to stand at the front door, went back and picked up a news release and handed it to him and said thank you. And he came back never having even seen the meeting. I remember at the time that this was extremely offensive and it just seemed out of step. And so I called the United Way and suggested to them, if their organization has to pick and choose the colors of the reporters who cover their affairs, that I would suggest they can hardly exist in the media world, because we can't plan that way. And there was an immediate reaction. They realized that that was wrong, and they stopped having meetings in segregated places.